I think most Australians would agree that a strong economy is one where there's an expanding middle class, not a shrinking one. And at the moment, I think more and more working people, particularly in low-skilled industries, are concerned that their wages aren't keeping up with the amount that profits are going up within the community, which of course impacts on their capacity to have a decent standard of living. So the more we can do to increase people's wages, to the extent at least that they feel as though they're part of an expanding middle class, would go a long way to giving the community confidence that income inequality is not a growing issue but instead a declining one.
And how do we increase wages? What are the pressures holding it down, and what can the union movement and the broader progressive movement do to push them up?
Well, it won't surprise you for a union leader to say this, but the best thing a working person can do to increase their wages is to join a union. It is well documented that Australian workers who are unionised are going to earn a far better income, regardless of what industry they're in, than what they would be if they're not unionised. So that's the first step. But of course, the capacity for the trade union movement to be able to enunciate clear, well thought through, evidence-based arguments to both the Fair Work Commission but also to their respective employers around why real wage growth is important, not just to working people but to the economy as a whole, will stand us in good stead for increasing wage growth.
So your union represents mostly low-paid workers, relatively unskilled workers. So you're at the coalface of the argument about whether higher wages actually push people out of employment. What's your view on this argument that higher minimum wages equals higher unemployment?
Well, look, it doesn't stack up. The truth is that the Australian minimum wage is one of the highest in the world, but we still have enjoyed a relatively lengthy period of low unemployment in comparison to other OECD nations. So there just isn't the evidence that to back up claims that reducing the minimum wage will somehow reduce unemployment. Indeed, there's a counter-argument that needs to be made more effectively, I think, that of course that says when you actually decrease the wages of low-skilled workers or decrease the wages of working people more generally, it actually has a negative economic impact. In Australia, the Australian economy is overwhelmingly driven by consumption. And if we have got diminishing wages from working people, then we diminish the capacity of thousands of Australians to be able to engage in consumption. Increasing wages at sustainable levels, but increasing wages allows a greater level of consumption, which of course dramatically contributes towards economic growth.
I'll just stop you there. Can I just pop this? Great. Just because we're getting a bit of bounce.
Sure, sorry.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And what about at the top end? Are we doing enough for people on really high incomes? Are we taxing them enough? Should we be looking at capping those sort of incomes? What about that end?
Well, look, I don't think there's much to be gained by denouncing people at the top end of the income scale earning more. I mean, I'm not a communist. I'm all for people earning decent wages and growing wages, even if they're at the top end. I think the question that we have to ask as a society is whether or not taxation policy is in the best place to make sure that we have an equitable society. And I think the standout there in terms of where we do have a problem is in the area of superannuation. There's obviously been a lengthy debate in Australia recently about whether or not superannuation is taxed at reasonable rates, particularly at that top end, and I think that's a debate that should continue. And I really hope that in the next election the Labor Party has a very decent policy when it comes to making sure that the superannuation scheme is taxed at a fair rate for all.
And what else can we do to help workers have a stake in the general rise in prosperity in the country?
Look, I think that we need to start turning our attention to what more can we do as a community to encourage employers and employers to engage in employee share ownership schemes. It is to the benefit of both employers and employees if employees have got a genuine stake in the outcomes that businesses deliver. Employees need to be able to get a dividend if their companies perform extremely well. And sometimes in low-skilled industry and through the traditional means of bargaining, that is incredibly difficult. I know through my experience of EBA negotiations with Coles and Woolworths that getting decent pay rises over and above the rate of inflation is getting harder and harder, particularly in a very competitive industry. So the more we can do to be able to incentivise companies giving a stake in the business to employees, the better, because of course those are, particularly in our industry, in the retail industry, where companies are extremely profitable, it's only appropriate that workers are getting a dividend from that, and I think share ownership provides a vehicle to achieve that.
And so today is all about ideas for the ALP's national conference. the big issues will get addressed one way or the other, but is there a topic or an issue that's kind of close to your heart which you wish was getting more attention in the public debate, in the ALP debate?
Yeah, look, I think income inequality is that issue. As I said from the outset, Australians understand that a strong economy should be underpinned by a growing middle class, not a shrinking one. That is a centre-of-the-road economic message that is incredibly powerful, that should appeal to the community at large. And I think Labor wins elections when we make that message clear. We win elections when we focus on our core business, which is of course making sure that we've got a growing economy, but one that also delivers across the community, not just at the top end of town.